I spent 5 years of my life loving Daniel Carter, an educated youth sent to Willow Creek to serve his country, and we had promised each other that once we returned to the city, we'd get married and finally build the life we dreamed about together. I stayed in this remote, windswept village for him, not because I had to, but because I believed in us. I gave up my own urban prospects and carried the burden of farm work, dirt, sweat, and mosquito bites so that he could read, rest, and prepare for his return to city life. But none of that mattered when Vanessa Collins showed up. His so-called niece, a spoiled brat with a sharp tongue and shiny leather shoes, came from the city whining about how hard rural life was and demanding my spot back to the city. That was the beginning of the end. The morning she and Daniel barged into the pigsty to confront me, I had just finished feeding the pigs. Pig slop stained my clothes, my face was slick with sweat, and my boots were caked in manure. I was gross, yes, but I was also proud of my work until Vanessa screamed as if I'd thrown acid on her instead of pig feed. She jumped into Daniel's arms with the dramatics of a city-bred soap opera star, shrieking, "Uncle!" She did it on purpose. "Are you trying to punish me because I asked her to give up her quota?" I didn't even get the chance to open my mouth. The man I had given 5 years of my life to didn't ask a single question, just kicked me. Hard. I stumbled backward into the pigsty like I was nothing more than trash. He walked away holding Vanessa like she was made of porcelain, while I lay there with tears, mud, and the stench of betrayal all over me. But the joke was on them. I never had a quota. What I held wasn't a ticket back to the city. It was a signed job offer from Chingwind Breeding Farm, an official letter, making me the director of a new pilot livestock program. And that's what Vanessa tore to shreds right in front of me while giggling like it was some kind of game. The pain of that moment didn't even compare to what came after. 3 days later, I went to Mayor Edwards and told him clearly, the pilot project is a success. I'm returning to the city. But even before that, there was more humiliation. Vanessa strutted around the youth housing with her high-pitched voice echoing through the courtyard, telling everyone I was a stinky pig farmer and questioning how someone like me could ever be family. Daniel didn't defend me. No, he added to the insult. "Claire may stink a little, but she's good at doing chores," he said with a fake chuckle, as if I weren't standing right there. "You've been pampered your whole life, Vanessa. She's just a pig farmer. What use is she back in the city?" He even had the audacity to bury his face in her neck right there in public. My chest burned. I couldn't stop myself from banging on the door. When he opened it, he looked the same calm, refined, the Daniel I knew, but his ears were red. Guilty, maybe? Not that it mattered. Vanessa didn't hesitate to hurl a broom at my head and scream, "You're disgusting. Get out of here." Daniel rushed toward me, not to scold her, but to check my wound. "Claire, are you dumb? Why didn't you dodge?" His palm reached for my head like I was some stray animal. I flinched. "Vanessa," I said through clenched teeth, "I cleaned your shoes already. I was careless, that's all." She blushed and muttered, "I'm not even his real niece anyway." I almost left so. They were finally dropping the act. She held out her hands, and I knew exactly what she meant. The quota. But what Daniel thought was a quota was actually the job offer I once planned to give him as a reward for his help on the pilot project. I had told him Chingwind Breeding Farm was scouting Willow Creek. I even explained that once we proved the model worked, they'd issue formal hires. But Daniel never listened. He thought I was bluffing. He thought I was lying to hold him back. He dragged me to the market to buy my favorite snack like some pathetic bribe. "Give the letter to Vanessa already," he snapped. "You worked hard for it, but my brother got promoted. She'll pull some strings and bring me back with her." Not Usham. That's when it all clicked. He didn't love me. He loved the opportunity one represented. And when I didn't give it to him, he punished me. Vanessa said it first, but I saw the truth in Daniel's silence. He believed I slept with someone to get that offer. "You think so too?" I asked. He didn't even deny it. Just turned away. Vanessa stuffed her face with the canned goods I'd bought and insulted me at the same time. "Dirty pig farmer." She spit out the words like venom. When I called her out, she screamed and flipped the table, smashing everything I had saved up enough supplies to feed 2 pigs for a week. My chest cracked in two. I crouched down, picking up broken jars like they were pieces of my pride. Then she shoved me. I hit the floor hard, glass slicing the corner of my mouth and nearly taking out my eye. Daniel pulled me up and dabbed the wound with straw paper rough, stinging and humiliating. I pushed his hand away and he looked hurt, as if I had insulted him. "Straw paper too good for you?" he snapped. I glanced at the white handkerchief in his pocket, the one Vanessa always carried. He noticed and pulled it halfway out. "You want this?" I nodded. He let it drop. It landed on broken glass, got smeared in dirt, and shredded just like my heart. That's when he demanded the quota again. "I have a job offer from Ching Wind," I told him. His Adam's apple bobbed, and I could see that glimmer of hope in his eyes, but it quickly faded. "You? A pig farmer?" "Stop lying." Vanessa walked over and spit on my face. "You seriously think a dirty girl like you got an offer? Hilarious." I stared at Daniel until the hope disappeared from his gaze. "Didn't you say you had the quota?" he asked. "No," I said. "I never did." "Then what's Vanessa supposed to do?" he exploded. "You slept with someone and didn't even get it. What the hell is wrong with you?" Vanessa started crying again, her crocodile tears flowing like a faucet. "Little uncle," she sobbed, "will you still marry me like you promised?" He hesitated. "Vanessa, I'm your uncle." I couldn't even process what I was hearing anymore. Vanessa clung to him, pounding his chest and saying he'd changed, that she'd ask her dad to marry her off far away so she wouldn't be a burden. And he panicked. For the first time in 5 years, I saw Daniel scared, not clueless, not helpless, but genuinely afraid. "Claire, apologize," he shouted at me. "Vanessa's crying. Can't you see that?" I stood frozen. He grabbed me by the back of the neck and demanded again. When I refused, he kicked the backs of my legs, and I fell to my knees on broken glass. I screamed. Sweat poured down my face. I looked up at him through tears. "Daniel Carter, let me go." He loosened his grip for a moment, but then shoved me again. "Apologize, and maybe I won't tell people you slept your way to the top." I laughed bitterly. "You'll regret this." I knew then that if I didn't crawl and beg, I wouldn't make it out of that house. So I did. I knelt at Vanessa's feet, bleeding, trembling, apologizing over and over. Only when she smiled did he throw me out like garbage. He didn't even look back. He just wrapped her in his arms, like I had never existed. And as I limped away, blood dripping behind me, I made a silent vow. If they wanted me to be the pig farmer, fine. But I'd be the one in charge of the whole damn farm. Let's see how they like that. Because I'm not done. I'm not broken. And I'm not going to let them win. I didn't sleep that night, not because of the physical pain though, believe me. My legs, my ribs, my face all screamed, but because every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel's cold stare, heard his voice telling me to apologize to Vanessa as if I were the one who had done something unforgivable. I had known humiliation, sure, but not like this. Not like crawling in front of the girl who destroyed my life, while the man I loved looked on without a shred of guilt. My body was wrecked, but I dragged myself to the clinic the next morning. The village doctor didn't say much, just clicked his tongue as he pulled shard after shard of glass from my skin. Sweat poured down his face, more than mine. I didn't cry, not even once. I kept my jaw clenched as he bandaged my leg and muttered that it looked bad. Of course it looked bad. Everything looked bad. After I left the clinic, I limped to Mayor Edwards' office and told him I wanted to go back to the city. I still had the connection. The pilot pig farming program had succeeded, and the employment letter, though shredded, had already been documented. We set the date 3 days later. I would leave Willow Creek. But before that, there was one more scene to play out. As I was cleaning out my small house near the pigsty, Daniel showed up. He stood in the doorway, staring at my leg still bleeding through the bandages, and gave this long, heavy sigh like he was the one suffering. Then he did something that cracked the last inch of me. He reached out, rubbed the top of my head the same way he used to when I was feverish or crying over village gossip, and said, "Claire, don't take things so hard." I blinked back tears. That gesture, that voice, it used to mean the world to me. But now it felt hollow, like a cheap magic trick from a magician who'd run out of cards. I pushed his hand away and said, "You don't have to marry me anymore." His face twisted with what might have been shock or might have been annoyance. He forced a laugh and snatched the key to my house. "Please. The whole village thinks you're obsessed with me anyway." "What? You're going to pretend you're over it now?" I froze. So he knew. He knew all along that the village Andy's gossiped, that I'd blushed and stuttered every time someone teased us about getting married. He knew and never once shut it down. No wonder people had started calling me pathetic behind my back. I had humiliated myself in front of everyone, and he had let it happen because it benefited him. He turned me into the joke. The worst part? I'd let him. I had once even cleaned out my own room when he claimed Vanessa couldn't stand the dorm beds. He said mine smelled, but that it was better than the rest, and I let her move in. The day she arrived, she tossed out all my belongings, including the only photo I had left of my parents. When I saw her laughing over it, stomping on the cracked glass like it was a toy, I snapped. I pushed her and screamed, "Get out! Get out of my house!" But Daniel stood in front of her and shielded her like a human wall. I slapped him then. "I don't regret it." He grabbed my wrist and shouted, "That's enough. They're dead. What's more important, the living or 2 corpses in a photo?" I fell to the ground, hugging the broken frame while Vanessa stood behind him, sticking her tongue out at me like a smug little demon. That night, they threw all my things in a pile beside the cow sheet and told me to sleep there. "Just for a couple of days," Daniel said. "Vanessa says seeing you makes her chest hurt. Stay away from her for now." I lay on the straw, feverish, my body soaked with sweat and mosquito bites. I barely had the strength to move. When the 3rd morning came, one of the village aunties yanked me out of the shed in a panic. Claire, something terrible happened." I limped after her, my vision swimming. And then I saw a pilot pig pen. The pigs I had raised for 5 years were lying in pools of blood, squealing, dying, and some already dead. 10 pigs, all slaughtered. My breath left my lungs. I dropped to my knees. I couldn't even scream. Mr. Wong, the farmhand, stood there looking horrified. "I don't know what happened, Claire. They were fine yesterday. I swear." Then Daniel appeared, dragging Vanessa by the arm. "She says the pigs had swine fever. Her dad works at a breeding farm. She would know." I saw the red welts on the pig's skin, welts from slingshots, not disease. But no one listened. Vanessa held up a handful of dead mice she'd conveniently found outside the pen and shouted, "It's the plague. Look. Dead rats." I staggered to my feet and shouted, "Those were already dead. I killed them yesterday. You planted them, Vanessa." But her voice was louder, and the crowd had already decided. Panic rippled through the villagers. Someone picked up a butcher knife. I ran into the pig pen, dragging my injured leg, trying to protect the last pig. I screamed, "These pigs are high-quality breeders. They're adapted to saline alkali soil. Killing them destroys the entire project." But they didn't stop. Daniel grabbed me and pulled me out of the pen while villagers raised their knives. "Don't cause trouble, Claire," he muttered. "Vanessa's doing this for everyone's good." That's when I realized. He didn't believe the pigs had swine fever. He didn't care. This was all revenge because I hadn't given him what he wanted. Vanessa was directing everything, gleefully ordering people to slaughter the animals I'd raised with blood and sweat. And Daniel let her. I broke free and jumped back into the pen, arms outstretched in front of the last pig. I screamed at the top of my lungs, "I'm the director of Qingwind Breeding Farm." No one listened. Vanessa burst out laughing. "Sure you are. If you're the director, I'm the President of the United States." She turned to the crowd. "Why are you hesitating? Kill them already. Why keep these dirty animals?" Daniel pulled me out again, this time with a look of pure disgust. Claire, you've embarrassed yourself enough. These pigs are infected. Do you want to kill the whole village? I stared at him, my face bruised, my eyes burning. They're not sick. You know that. He looked away. He knew, but he didn't care, because it was never about pigs. It was about power. It was about the fact that I dared to say no. I fell to my knees and held onto his pant leg. Please, Daniel. Please don't let them do this. My voice cracked. These pigs can feed families. They are worth more than you can imagine. Don't take away our future. I reached into my pocket and pulled out what remained of the job offer. It was wrinkled and bloodstained, but still intact enough to prove my identity. Daniel stared at it, uncertain. I could see the calculation behind his eyes. If he opened it, he'd know I was telling the truth. If he believed me, he'd lose his last excuse to side with Vanessa. And then, at the last moment, Vanessa snatched it out of his hand and tore it to pieces. Oops, she said with a smirk. I screamed and dove forward, scraping my hands across the gravel trying to gather the pieces. My fingers bled. My chest heaved. The butcher raised his knife and brought it down, and the only thing that saved the last pig was the sudden arrival of the village chief, Mr. Thompson. Stop, he shouted, rushing through the crowd, his face purple with rage. Stop it right now. The villagers froze. The mayor and several officials arrived right behind him, dust in their wake. Everyone looked stunned. I lay on the ground, blood in my mouth, hands shaking, body broken. But I looked up at Vanessa and Daniel and knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The air turned so thick you could slice it with a butcher knife as the crowd froze under Mayor Edwards's voice, and for a second, just 1 second, I saw real fear in Daniel's eyes, like maybe, just maybe, he realized the gravity of what they'd done. Mr. Thompson, the village chief, tripped over his own feet rushing toward the slaughter scene, nearly face-planting before pushing himself back up, eyes wild as he screamed at the butcher to stop. He took one look at the pile of dead pigs, the blood pooling under their throats, the last surviving pig bleeding from a shallow stab wound, and his face went pale as salt. What the hell happened here? He shouted, spinning to face the crowd. My body was already trembling from pain, blood caked on my temple, hands torn raw from trying to gather the shredded remains of my job offer. I tried to stand, but my knee buckled and I fell again, this time into the gore-soaked dirt. The village chief looked at me, his face contorting when he saw the state I was in. Claire, oh God, what did they do to you? He turned back to the crowd and locked eyes on Daniel and Vanessa. You told them this was swine fever? Daniel cleared his throat and tried to fake calmness, but his voice cracked. Vanessa's father works at a breeding plant. She recognized the signs, but the village chief was no idiot. He pointed at the pigs, gesturing toward the welts and bruises. These pigs weren't sick. They were beaten. Slingshot wounds, not plague. Vanessa's hand flew to her chest like she was some Victorian maiden about to faint. Chief, I swear. I found dead rats right outside the pen. Doesn't that mean anything? The pigs were acting crazy, and you're the crazy one, he snapped. You slaughtered half our future because of some scuff on your shoes and a bruised ego. The villagers started murmuring. Doubt crept into their expressions like morning fog, and a few began exchanging guilty glances. I looked up at Daniel, expecting him to at least step back, maybe retreat quietly. But no, doubled down, grabbed Vanessa by the arm, and said she was just trying to help. She thought something was wrong. What were we supposed to wait until someone died? The village chief wasn't having it. He slapped Daniel so hard his glasses flew into the mud, teeth clacking against each other. The entire crowd gasped. Vanessa whimpered and tried to hide behind Daniel, but even he looked dazed now, unsure how to continue the performance. Where's your evidence? The chief barked. Where's your authority to make that call? Did anyone even think to check with Claire before butchering the entire pilot project? One of the older men in the crowd, Mr. Harlan, finally muttered. Now that you mention it, them pigs didn't look sick at all, another woman added. I thought they were just real active, not diseased. But Vanessa made such a fuss. the murmuring turned to grumbling. The butcher dropped his knife and took a slow step back. And then, Vanessa made her final mistake. She puffed up her chest, raised her voice, and declared, "Well, I'm from Qingwind Breeding Farm, too. If anything, I was sent here to inspect things, and clearly these pigs weren't up to standard. I was just doing my job." For half a second, no one said anything. Then I laughed. Loudly. Spitefully. "You were sent to inspect? That's funny, because I don't remember hiring you." Vanessa turned beet red. "What are you talking about?" she snapped. "You don't have the authority, only the forest chief does." "Mr. Thompson turned sharply to me. "Claire, you didn't tell them?" I shook my head slowly. "Tell them what?" Vanessa barked. The mayor stepped forward, pointing a firm finger at me. "She's the director. The actual director of Qingwind Breeding Farm's Rural Pilot Division. Claire Bennett. The woman you tried to frame, beat, and publicly humiliate. She's the one who got this project off the ground. She's the reason we even had a chance at a better life." The silence that followed could have buried a city. Vanessa's mouth hung open. Daniel blinked like someone had just rewired his brain. "No," Vanessa whispered, her voice shrill. "That's not true. My dad runs the East Grove branch. I grew up around farms." "She's lying." "If you're so connected, then you must have heard of William Bennett," the mayor said, stepping aside as William finally emerged from the crowd, his dark eyes locking onto mine. "He's standing right there." Vanessa's jaw dropped further. "William," she stuttered. I'm her subordinate," William said calmly. "And her friend. And the only reason she's not pressing charges yet is because she still believes in this village." He walked over to me and gently helped me up, his hand steady beneath my elbow. I didn't realize how badly I was shaking until he was holding me. Daniel stared at William like he'd seen a ghost. "You're having an affair with him?" he growled. "Is that why you turned against me?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The crowd had started whispering again, but this time they weren't talking about me. They were talking about Daniel and Vanessa, and the way they clung to each other, the too close for comfort hugs, the touches, the glances. One of the aunties finally said what everyone was thinking. "I saw them in the woods the other day. Not uncle and niece behavior, if you ask me. His hands were places they shouldn't be." Daniel tried to laugh it off, but his face had gone pale. Vanessa shrieked, "You old hags don't know what you're talking about. That was just a misunderstanding. The bruises on your neck say otherwise," I snapped. She clutched her collar, trying to hide the love bites. Daniel went silent. He didn't even try to deny it. But then he did the one thing I didn't expect. He dropped to his knees in front of me. "Claire, listen. She tricked me. She got me drunk. I thought it was you. I never meant for this to happen. I love you. Please forgive me." The crowd started booing. Even Vanessa looked disgusted. "You're disgusting," she muttered. "Crawling on your knees for her after everything?" Daniel reached for my hand, but William stepped in, swatting it away. "Back off," he said coldly. "You don't get to touch her now. I just want her to understand." Daniel screamed. "I made a mistake, but I'm willing to fix it. Let me marry her. I'll transfer the breeding farm under her name and stay home to raise the kids. I swear." I stepped back and stared at him like he was a rabid dog. "Daniel Carter, you seriously think that's what I want? You think I've been bleeding, crawling, and building my future just to hand it over to someone like you? You think I'm the kind of woman who needs a man to gift her what she already earned?" He blinked dumbly. "I can manage the farm. You don't have to do anything. That's the problem." I cut in. "You want me to disappear while you run the show. But you're not even good at pretending anymore." And then I said the words that turned him into dust. "I saw you that night, Daniel. Outside the window. You weren't tricked. You weren't drunk. You were enjoying every second." His face crumbled. "You were supposed to save me," he whispered. "Why didn't you stop me?" "Because I was done saving you." The villagers didn't need any more proof. They began shouting, some demanding the mayor press charges, others calling for Daniel and Vanessa to be expelled. Mr. Thompson raised his hands. Enough. They're not welcome here anymore. But we won't waste taxpayer money dragging them through court. No breeding work, no leadership roles, no community decisions. They can stay, but they're done. Vanessa screamed. You can't do this to us.
I'm pregnant.
Silence. A different kind of silence. The kind that cuts. Then you can both rot in a shed, someone muttered. Daniel tried to speak, but he couldn't form words. Vanessa collapsed to the ground, sobbing, and the crowd began to scatter. William squeezed my shoulder. You sure you're okay? I am now, I said. And I meant it. After the villagers turned away, leaving Daniel and Vanessa collapsed in the dirt like discarded trash, I stood still for a long moment, letting the silence settle into my bones. The screams had faded, the accusations were done, but the weight of everything they destroyed, the pigs, the trust, the 5 years of my soul still pressed against my chest like a stone I couldn't lift. William didn't say a word, just stood beside me with his hand barely grazing my arm, close enough for support but far enough for dignity. I looked down at Daniel, still on his knees, his lips cracked and eyes bloodshot, gripping my ankle like a man trying to stop a train with his bare hands. Claire, he whispered again, like my name alone could rewrite history. I didn't flinch, didn't cry, didn't even blink. I just stared at him the way you'd stare at something you once loved before realizing it was poison. You didn't know she was that vicious? I finally asked, my voice low, cutting. That's what you want me to believe? He nodded frantically, then grabbed my hand like a lifeline, like his pathetic display of desperation would erase everything he'd said, every kick, every bruise, every insult hurled from his lips in Vanessa's defense. I'll fix it. I'll make it right, he begged, voice cracking. I'll stay here. I'll build another breeding farm from scratch. I'll do all the work. You won't have to lift a finger. I looked him dead in the eye. You think this is about pigs? His eyes widened, like the thought had never occurred to him that what he destroyed wasn't just livestock, it was my life. I turned my back to him and limped toward William, the weight of my bandaged leg reminding me of every step that led here. My past self-declare who once adored Daniel Carter and thought love was about enduring pain was long gone. The Claire standing now knew better. Mayor Edwards called me into his office that evening. He looked aged, like the day had drained 10 years from his face. His hands shook slightly as he offered me tea, which I refused. I didn't want comfort. I wanted resolution. Claire, he said carefully, we've officially suspended Daniel and Vanessa from any agricultural duties. They'll stay here, but they're not allowed to touch a single thing that relates to the breeding project or the farm. I nodded. They can rot here for all I care, as long as they're out of the way. That's not all, the mayor added, pulling a folder from his desk. We reviewed the records. Your pilot program has officially been deemed a success. You're cleared to return to the city in 5 days. 5 days. I should have felt thrilled, but instead I felt strangely hollow. Everything I had worked for was being handed back to me, but the joy that should have come with it had been buried under betrayal and swine blood. Still, I thanked him and signed the departure form with a steady hand. I didn't look back until I was halfway to the village square, where William was waiting under a lamppost, arms crossed and face unreadable. You okay? He asked softly. As okay as I'll ever be, I muttered. We didn't talk much after that. I stayed in the cowshed because, technically, Vanessa still occupied my house. She had thrown my life out of that space and now used it as her personal nesting ground, even while under village punishment. I didn't care anymore. She could sleep there surrounded by broken glass and stolen linens for all I cared. My focus was on recovery, both mine and the village's. But it wasn't that easy. Because of her tantrum, the pigs were dead, and the village had lost its only source of new income. I met with Mr. Thompson every morning to strategize a way to rebuild. He was bitter, ashamed, and constantly wringing his hands. We trusted the wrong people, he told me one day, staring down at his cracked boots. And we betrayed the one who actually gave us a future. I wanted to be angry, but all I felt was tired. Let's stop talking about betrayal and start talking about fixing this. And so we did. We used what little savings we had left to build a temporary holding pen. We sent out emergency requests to the main Qingwind office asking for backup supplies. I tapped into every favor I had earned in 5 years. And when the first transport truck rolled into Willow Creek with new piglets, I finally felt my chest rise without pressure. That night, as I sat outside the pen watching the piglets stumble around under the heat lamps, William sat beside me and handed me a cup of lukewarm tea. "You could have let them rot," he said. "You could have walked away and never looked back." I nodded. But I didn't raise this village to abandon it. He looked at me then with this quiet pride that wrapped around my ribs like warmth in winter. I sipped the tea and let the silence stretch, heavy but peaceful. Then the rumors started. Apparently, Vanessa couldn't handle the work. She tried scrubbing a trough and burst into tears halfway through. Daniel was caught stealing food from the market one night and got beaten so badly he limped for days. The villagers didn't stop them, but they didn't help either. The punishment wasn't jail. It was something worse. It was irrelevance. Daniel had always needed power, control, admiration. Now he had none of that. Vanessa, spoiled from birth, had no one left to manipulate. They were trapped in the village I had lifted from poverty, breathing the air I once called home, and choking on the bitterness of their own downfall. But even that wasn't the end. Because 3 days before my return to the city, Vanessa showed up at my temporary office, her face pale and her voice trembling. "Claire," she said softly, "I need to talk to you." I didn't look up. "Get out." "Please," she said, stepping closer.
I'm sorry.
"I didn't know. You didn't know?" I snapped, slamming my pen on the desk. "You didn't know what?" "That framing me, tearing up my job offer, destroying 5 years of work, and spreading lies would ruin people's lives? You didn't know that being a brat with a fancy last name doesn't make you a better person?" She flinched. "I was scared. You weren't scared," I said coldly. "You were entitled. And now that you're living like the rest of us, you finally understand what it means to have consequences." Her bottom lip trembled, and for a split second, I thought she might say something human. But then she raised her chin and whispered, "Daniel still loves you." I laughed. I actually laughed. "Oh, honey, that's the saddest thing I've heard all week." She didn't reply, just turned and walked away, her back hunched like a deflated balloon. I watched her go and didn't feel a damn thing. That night, I dreamed of my parents. In the dream, we were all sitting at the dinner table, laughing over burnt dumplings and spilled tea. My mom's voice echoed in my ears. "Don't carry people who try to bury you." I woke up with tears on my cheeks, but not from sadness.
From peace.
I stood, got dressed, and walked outside where the sky was slowly turning pink. William was already waiting at the gate. He held out a small framed, picture-me old family portrait, repaired. "You're not alone," he said. I took it in my hands, and for the first time in years, I truly believed it. The morning before I left Willow Creek, the air felt oddly still, like the wind itself had stopped to watch what was coming. I was walking toward the breeding center to check on the new piglets when I saw a crowd gathered near the edge of the village. People murmured, faces pale, some looking horrified, others unable to stop whispering. At first, I thought maybe another pig had fallen sick, but no, this was different. Mr. Thompson was standing in the center, yelling for someone to get a doctor, and that's when I noticed what they were all staring at. 2 bodies, sprawled on the edge of the mountain trail behind the cowshed. One was twisted awkwardly with blood seeping from her mouth, the other motionless, with a leg bent at a sickening angle. It didn't take me long to recognize them. Daniel Carter and Vanessa Collins, what was left of them. Except this time, the chaos wasn't staged. There was no act, no tantrum, no audience to manipulate. They had rotted in the background long enough, but now fate had dragged them screaming back into the spotlight. Turns out, Vanessa had snapped. A few villagers later told me she'd been overheard arguing with Daniel the night before. She accused him of still being in love with me, of planning to return to the city without her. She'd stolen the little money they had left, bought pesticides from a passing vendor, and in one final fit of madness, poisoned them both. Only she miscalculated. Daniel didn't die immediately. He survived just long enough to crawl to the trail, scraping his body through dirt and gravel, looking for help that never came. By the time they were found by villagers out gathering firewood, it was already too late. Their bodies were rotting, faces barely recognizable, eyes frozen in the kind of horror you don't forget. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. William found me an hour later standing near the village gate, arms crossed, face unreadable. "Are you okay?" he asked for probably the 1,000th time. I nodded. "I'm fine." And I was. Because as much as I hated what they had done to me, I never wished this. But karma has a way of tying knots tighter than anything a human could plan. They burned the future I built, and now they were buried in the ashes of their own doing. The villagers held a quiet, awkward funeral not out of love, but out of tradition. No one cried. No one mourned. Their graves were dug shallow, more a formality than a resting place. What stunned me more than anything was how quickly they were erased from conversation. It was like the village collectively decided they never mattered. But that wasn't the end of their story, not really. A few weeks later, I got word that Vanessa had been pregnant after all. The autopsy confirmed it. It was the final twist in a saga I'd already emotionally signed off from. And as for Daniel, well, no one ever claimed his body. His family, once so proud of their high-achieving son, refused to take responsibility for the disgrace he'd become. Even Vanessa's so-called guardians from East Grove cut ties, pretending she was never more than a distant cousin. The whole family turned their backs, as if scrubbing their sins clean with silence. Good. Let them choke on their shame. Meanwhile, Willow Creek bloomed like never before. The pilot project was reinstated, this time backed with official government support and a new budget approved directly by Kingwin's Central Board. We rebuilt the pens, expanded the facilities, and implemented a new generation of disease-resistant breeds. The village went from forgotten farmland to a success story cited in regional newspapers. They called me a pioneer, a visionary. The same girl who was once dragged into pig pens and spat on now stood in front of mayors and delegates shaking hands and giving interviews. But none of that compared to what happened the day I officially returned to the city. I stepped off the train and was greeted not just by William, but by a group of senior Qingwind board members. They presented me with an award-engraved plaque and a permanent position as head of rural agricultural strategy. I had left the city 5 years ago with dirt under my nails and love blinding my eyes. I came back with power, purpose, and scars that told the truth. William invited me to dinner that night. Not a fancy banquet, just a quiet meal at a small restaurant tucked away from all the noise. As we ate, he pulled out something wrapped in cloth. I raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" He smiled and unwrapped the bunlight. Was the old family photo, perfectly restored. No cracks, no broken glass, just my parents and me smiling like they'd never left. "Thought you should have it," he said, "for your new home." I looked at the photo, my eyes stinging. Not with sadness, but with that kind of soft ache you feel when you realize the worst is finally behind you. "Thank you," I whispered, "for everything." "I didn't do anything," he said, shrugging. "You survived this on your own." "No," I replied. "I didn't survive. I rebuilt. There's a difference." He laughed softly and raised his glass. "To rebuilding." We clinked our glasses and sat in silence for a moment, the kind that feels heavy with all the words we didn't need to say. But later that night, as we walked along the quiet riverbank near my new apartment, he suddenly turned to me and asked, "Do you ever think about starting over? Not just work, but life?" I stopped walking. "You mean?" He didn't answer. Just looked at my stomach, and then my face. His eyes weren't prying or demanding, just hopeful. I took his hand and placed it gently over the small curve that had only recently started to show. "Our new life is already beginning," I said. And in that moment, with the breeze brushing my cheek and the city lights sparkling across the water, I knew with absolute certainty Daniel was my past. William was my present. And this little life inside me, that was my future. The first time I felt the baby kick, I was sitting in the conference room of Kingwin's headquarters, flipping through a thick stack of rural development proposals while pretending I still had the mental capacity to care about formatting, but that one little flutter below my ribs made everything else blur out of focus like the world itself paused just for us. And for a second, I stopped being the director, the expert. The survivor I was just a woman who had bled for too long, finally feeling life bloom inside her again. And I swear I almost cried right there in front of the entire boardroom, but instead I took a breath, rubbed my belly gently under the table, and whispered silently, "We made it, baby, we really made it." And I think they all just assumed I was marveling at data, when in fact I was marveling at existence itself. Because after being kicked into pigsties, spat on, humiliated, betrayed, manipulated, and left to rot, this was the first moment where I wasn't just alive, I was truly living, and no one, not even the ghosts of Daniel Carter and Vanessa Collins, could touch that, not anymore, because while they had spent their final days locked in a slow, festering collapse of resentment and insanity, I had clawed my way back from nothing and turned that nothing into legacy, into policy, into reform, and the breeding model I built in Willow Creek was now being duplicated across 5 counties and counting, with newspapers calling it the rural miracle and ministers visiting in droves trying to understand how a woman in boots and bandages had done what 3 full-time departments couldn't accomplish in a decade. And I'd be lying if I said I wasn't proud I was, and fiercely sob it wasn't the articles, or the plaques, or the government handshakes that made it all worth it. It was the letters from villagers, the photos of rebuilt barns, the children who now had full bellies because their parents didn't have to choose between food and medicine anymore. The women who wrote to me saying they stood up to husbands who told them they'd never be more than livestock caretakers. The teenage girls who whispered that I made them want to study animal science instead of marrying at 17, and all of it made me realize that for so long I had measured my worth through someone else's lens, through Daniel's validation, through Vanessa's ridicule, through the village's suspicion, but now my name, Claire Bennett, stood for something none of them could erase. And if that wasn't healing, I didn't know what was. And yet, through all the success and all the change, my favorite part of the day was still the quiet moment at home when I'd come back to find William bent over our tiny kitchen counter trying to figure out how to properly cook spinach without turning it into mush. And he'd look up with flour on his cheek and ask if the baby wanted tofu again, or if I was craving pickles and peanut butter this time, and I'd just laugh and say, "Surprise me." Because despite being one of the most meticulous men I'd ever met, William still cooked like a disaster in motion, and somehow I loved it more than any gourmet meal. Maybe because we had already lived through the bitterest of tastes, and now even the blandest soup felt like honey in comparison. And every now and then he'd pull me into his arms while I was trying to sort reports or draft logistics, and he'd rest his hand gently on my belly, whispering promises not just to me, but to our child, saying things like, "You'll never feel unwanted," or "You'll grow up knowing your mom changed everything." And I'd melt every single time because while Daniel always saw me as a stepping stone or a quota to bargain with, William saw me as the foundation, the architect, the fire starter, and the future all at once. And when I told him I wanted to go back to Willow Creek one more time before giving birth, not for closure, but for continuity, didn't hesitate, didn't guilt trip, didn't question, he just packed the car with extra water and a small medical kit and said, "Lead the way." And when we arrived, the fields were green, the pens were full, and the villagers came running like children greeting a long-lost mother, hugging me, thanking me, showing me their new piglets like they were presenting trophies. And when I walked past the spot where Vanessa once staged her fake swine fever crisis, all I felt was wind and grass and peace. Nothing more, no anger, no resentment, just the kind of emptiness that comes when a wound is fully closed. And I stood there for a while, rubbing my stomach, telling my child that this is where it began, that their mother was once buried here, but instead of staying in the dirt, she sprouted something that fed 1,000 mouths. And that night we stayed with Mr. Thompson, who made his famous spicy corn stew, and I gave a small talk to the new youth volunteers arriving to assist with breeding education. And when one of the girls asked me if I ever regretted not marrying my first love, I smiled and said, "He was never love, only a lesson." and William squeezed my hand under the table so gently it made my eyes sting. Not from pain, but from knowing that I would never again have to beg to be chosen, never again have to kneel for forgiveness I didn't owe. Never again have to offer a future to someone too foolish to hold it, because now I had everything I once thought I'd lost: respect, purpose, and a love so calm it healed in silence. And when we finally drove back to the city, I looked out the window at the fading village lights and didn't feel sadness, just a quiet goodbye, like brushing dust off a page before turning to the next chapter. And a few months later, in the middle of a golden autumn afternoon, I gave birth to a beautiful baby girl, with her father's eyes and my stubborn jaw. And when William placed her in my arms and whispered, "Welcome home," I knew he didn't mean the house or the hospital, meant the world, the one I'd carved out from nothing, the one that began in mud and blood but ended in light. And as I cradled her tiny body against my chest, I looked up at our framed family photo on the wall, William, and now her, and smiled. Because my happiness wasn't loud or showy. It was quiet, rooted, and unshakable. And no matter what storm came next, I had already lived through the worst and built something stronger than survival. I had built a life.